Resentment is like taking poison for yourself and expecting the other person to die.
Mindful Dads.
Hey everyone, welcome to Mindful Dads. I'm Alan and today we're going to talk about anger. Now, anger gets a bad name sometimes. It gets a bad name because we try and get rid of anger because society tells us that we shouldn't feel that way. Now, with every other emotion, anger has its function, and if we allow it to function in its moment, then that anger will pass over time. Now, I'm going to break anger down into three segments because if anger consumes us, then it can lead to other more difficult things in life which kind of get us into bother. And we then start to view life as a very resentful, hating place. So whatever we feel angry over, then that's fine. It's a natural emotion to a situation that is given to us. Now, if we hold on to that anger, sometimes that feeling of anger turns into something more. So when people say, I'm feeling really angry, then that's how they're feeling. Now, if people let that anger go over a few minutes, a few hours, and let it pass, then that doesn't get hold of us. You'll notice when people say, I'm in such a bad mood today, I feel so angry, I'm in an absolutely angry mood. It's probably because they've thought about whatever situation that's triggered their anger, whether it be 2 hours before, whether it be a day before, whether it be a year before, then what happens is that consumes us and it starts to turn into something different. So anger first, which is a feeling, which sometimes over time can then turn into hatred. If we start to feel angry a lot of the time, then that starts to turn into a mood. And when that mood starts to turn into something else, we've got something called resentment. Now, over time, you'll find that if someone gets angry and lets that anger go, then they're not an angry person. If that person holds on to that anger, you'll find that sometimes people describe things such as, that person's such a resentful person, or that person's such an angry person, because they hold on to that anger and it almost becomes them. So if we're talking about resentment, all it is something which has led on from one thing to the next to the next. And if you timeline that out, someone's felt angry about something maybe 2 days before, or 6 months before, or 10 years before, and they've never really let that anger go. And that resentment builds up and builds up and builds up. And lo and behold, you've got a very resentful person who views the world in a very resentful way. And that affects them on every single level. That affects them on a spiritual level, an emotional level, a psychological level, and a physical level. So anger is a natural feeling. We cannot get rid of it. What we tend to do is, because we feel angry, I don't want to feel this way, but this is awful, and I just want to feel something else. Now, that moment we start to experience that, then we're actually locked into it because we're trying to get rid of something which is natural. I always use the good term of no one ever really tries to change the weather. So the weather comes and goes. One day it's sunny, the next it's raining, the next it's a storm, whatever it is. Now, we don't go outside and go, I hate that tornado, I'm going to go into it and move it out the way because it's upsetting me. We look after ourselves in a storm. We batten down the hatches, we move out of the area, we keep ourselves safe until that storm passes. With emotions, when we feel happy, when we feel funny, when we're having joy going on, we take that on board and we just enjoy it. It's just a lovely natural feeling to have. But when we start to feel angry or stressed, we start to feel, I don't want this, this is horrible. And it's almost like going into that storm and trying to move that storm out of the way. If you walked into a tornado and said to yourself, I don't like you, I'm going to move you out of the way, then you'd get swept up by that tornado. Now use that analogy, and when we feel angry or resentful or hatred, then it's almost like we want to move that emotion out of the way because it's not suiting us in that moment. And when that happens, if we try and move that or stop it from happening, then lo and behold, we get swept away with it, just like the tornado sweeps us away. The key to anger is learning how to use it. Now, you see sports people use anger in a very, very productive way. You know, if a boxer's having a fight, he'll use that anger to generate a lot of energy to get him into his zone. You'll see runners, footballers, they'll use these emotions to generate power, to generate energy so they can get the best performance. Not in an angry way, but in a very productive way, which doesn't harm anyone else or yourself. From the beginning of the video, we talked about resentment, and it's almost like taking poison for yourself and expecting the other person to die. If we're aware that we've become resentful in some way, then we can start to make that change. If we're not, then lo and behold, this will go on for years, and you'll be a resentful person. And resentment over and over and over kind of gets into the physiological parts of your body and starts to take its toll on you. And we start to get ill because of that, because we're seeing the world in a very resentful, hating place. There's many ways to look at anger, and there's many ways to allow that feeling to pass, not get hold of you. As with a lot of our videos, hence, Mindful Dads, is we're going to take this approach from a very awareness perspective, a perspective where if we can just take a step back from our feelings, observe them, and then think to ourselves, is this useful? Is this going to be productive for me? And then we start to move through, yes, this is productive for me. I'm going to start to use this feeling to move myself forward. If it's not, then we allow that feeling to pass. By allowing that feeling to pass, we become the observer of our emotions, the observer of our thoughts, just like we observe the weather. We become something totally different, where we're able to take steps back from situations which we then don't get consumed by. I learned how to look at feelings of anger from a very mindful perspective through meditation. We'll cover that in a different video, because once you get to know yourself, things start to fit into place more. We know what to expect, and we know how to move through difficult situations because we know ourselves more. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'd love to hear some comments below with regards to how people have moved through anger and used it in a productive way. We'll see you soon.
Mindful Dads.